Well, how do you keep your listeners? How do you engage your listeners effectively? If you aren't walking the talk, then you're not going to be an effective preacher. If preaching is about moving people from here to there, how do you do it? How do you move them? There's, of course, things that we could talk about as far as you always share your heart in preaching. It's always got to come from your heart, from you. So really, in essence, I used to think preaching's not about me. I want to hide behind the gospel. I want to hide behind Christ. And there have been many times when I just wanted to hide behind the pulpit, and then there have been other times when I just wanted to hide. But that's another story. Here, the whole point is, when you're preaching, you're actually sharing your heart. So if you aren't walking the talk, then you're not going to be an effective preacher. If this means something to you and people see that it means something to you, you are more likely to move people if they see you've been moved. That's the first thing. Now, that may be an obvious thing. I hope it's an obvious thing. But the most effective preachers are the preachers who've been touched by the message they're preaching. So that is one of the first ways you're going to engage your listeners. They hear your heart. You may not have all the eloquent words. The Apostle Paul told the Corinthians he didn't come with eloquent words, but he did come with a story. And his story was, he was Saul once, the persecutor of the church. And he was on his way to Damascus, and he was knocked off his horse by the appearance of a bright light and a thunderous voice that came from heaven. And that voice was the voice of Christ that changed and transformed his life. And as Paul would have shared that story in town to town to town, people would have heard his heart because this was his story. And that's one of the things about preaching. It can be unique when you share your story. See, I shared my story before. I was raised in a Christian home, went to church every Sunday, and yet my heart was dull until God got a hold of me and my eyes were opened and I began to see and hear for the first time the truth of the gospel. That's my story. And stories are always going to be interesting. So I encourage you, if you have the opportunity in speaking publicly, in preaching to your church, to be able to weave your story in. Sometimes only has to be an anecdote, but it's your story and it's coming from your heart. So for example, you're given to speak on communion. When was the first time you got that? When was the first time it went click for you? As someone said, the money dropped into the parking meter. When was it that you realized this was a celebration of the body and blood of Christ, broken and given for you? When did that dawn on you? Whenever that was, and whatever that looked like, and whatever that felt like, and whatever the thought process was when it happened, share that. And share that around the scriptures of 1 Corinthians 11. Don't try and find a scripture that no one's ever found communion in before. Just keep it simple. 1 Corinthians 11. You know, that which I've received from the Lord I give to you, that on the night he was betrayed, and so on. So in doing that, you're going to keep the message simple, and simple's always engaging. Complex and complicated is really hard to listen to. Then there's some things that I want to help you in this next chapter of what I want to talk about now. That's going to take perhaps people who are already preaching, and you kind of get this. Now you want to go longer than 10 minutes and still hold people's attention. Well, I want to share something with you now, what I call the colour of a message. The colour of a message includes tone and shade. It includes volume. It includes the passion and the energy that you put into it. So here's what I suggest, and I will share this with young preachers just starting out. The first part of you walking up into that pulpit, that walking or standing before a crowd, the first thing you want to do is not so much what you're there to say. And I know that there are some people that maybe they're given 3 minutes, they haven't got much time to say it. But I would still encourage you to figure this out even in 3 minutes. The first thing is connect with those that you're about to talk to. Connect with them. Just peel back the curtains of your heart, let them see your heart a little bit, and let them connect with you. Connect with people. That's the first thing. And that's not where you start yelling. That's where you just start almost conversational. Like, I hope the tone that I'm using now, it's kind of the tone you would use in meeting someone in any public setting. Just use that tone, conversational tone. Connect with people. Share a little bit about your week. Share a little bit about your life. If they've never met you, share a little bit of your story of conversion. Let them know who you are. If these are people that you do know, then share something that helps them to connect with where you're at right now. That could be a funny thing happened on the way to church, or whatever it is. Let them connect with you at that time. Then I'm going to say that the energy level there at conversation is about 4 out of 10. That's the energy. So I'm not waving my arms, I'm not yelling, I'm not jumping up and down, I'm not running across the stage. I mean, that'd be weird, wouldn't it? In a social setting, we're just trying to have a conversation with someone. But at the same time, I want there to be some energy. That's what I'm saying. It's about 4 out of 10 energy. Then we're going to take it up a notch, just a notch, 5 out of 10. And every preacher is trying to solve a problem. So for example, if our message is the gospel, well, the problem is mankind's condition, mankind standing before God. Well, ramp up the energy just a little bit and let them know, here's the problem. And express it in a way that's just got a little bit more energy than your conversational energy. Then we're going to take it back down a little bit more, and we're going to discuss some of the various solutions that people have offered. People have said, if I get smarter, I'll get right with God. People have said, if I get more moral, I'll get right with God. People have said, if I get more successful, I'll get right with God. So we just take the energy down just a little bit. It's a part of the discussion. Again, it sounds like we're having a conversation rather than we're yelling at people. And then we're going to lift up that discussion toward the end of that discussion phase of the sermon. And we're going to just say, the problem is none of these work. None of them work. And you may want to slip in an anecdote, a story, maybe your own story about how you tried each of these things and none of them worked. And then we're going to ramp it up even more. Take it up to 7 out of 10. So we go from 4 to 5 to 6 toward the end of that, and then we ramp it up to 7, and 7's the solution. I've got good news for you. There's an answer. There's a solution. And now people are going, what? And you've got their attention. You don't have to be over the top, but you have to sound like you're passionate. That's what I mean by energy. 7 out of 10 energy. Give them the solution. Talk about the solution to the problem that you've outlined, and have them, through the discussion, think, oh yeah, that doesn't work, and that doesn't work, and I thought that might work, but that did. And so they're tracking with you. That's your mission there. And then you're going to bring it down as you then, we talk about the call. This is the summons. This is the challenge where we take it back down, and I'm not yelling at you now. I'm bringing this back down to a 5. There's still a level of passion. But now I'm going to ask you, please, and remember our question, what do I want people to do with what I'm about to say? That's what you're doing right now. I want you to give your life to Christ. I want you to stop running from God. I want you to turn and accept the offer that God has for you. You don't have to pray a complicated prayer. You don't have to get your act clean up. You just have to say one word to God's offer. And God's offer is, will you let me forgive you? Will you receive my son and accept his offer of forgiveness? You only have to pray a one-word prayer, and that prayer only has to be yes. You may not feel like you can do it. You may not feel like you have the energy, but if you can pray that one-word prayer, God begins the journey. God begins the journey. And that challenge becomes a part of the message. But you hear the tone, hear the volume, hear the energy. It's a passionate, almost intimate appeal, because now I'm after people not to say to me, that was a really good message, that was a really good sermon. I'm actually after people to say, I did that. You moved me. I did that. Then it really was a good sermon, wasn't it? And that's what we're trying to do. So that's what I talk about. Shade, light, tone, getting the colour and the variation. So it's not monotone, it's moving the tone, changing the tone, but appropriately. So that's the next thing that I think you need to work on if you really want to begin preaching and develop as a preacher.